whose career are you fighting for when the doors are closed other than your own? If we all had that mentality to think about who else are we helping lift and bring up along the journey, the world would be a much different place.
Hi everyone, welcome to Identity Unveiled. We are a lifestyle platform that discusses career, beauty, and health. Our platform supports the advancement of Asian American women to the executive ranks.
Today's guest is a woman breaking barriers in the investment management industry, Mita Mallick.
Mita Mallick, so excited to finally have you on our show. Mita is the head of inclusion, equity, and impact at Carta. If you don't know what Carta is a global ownership management platform that helps companies, investors, and employees manage equity. And Mita has an extensive career as a marketer in the beauty and consumer product goods space with companies like Unilever, Pfizer, Avon, and the list goes on and on. She's also a fierce advocate for the inclusion and representation of Black and Brown communities. Her love for inclusive storytelling inspired her to pursue a career as a chief diversity officer, and she co-hosts, if you haven't heard already, The Brown Table. It's a well-known and very popular podcast that's part of the LinkedIn Podcast Network, and they share stories, experiences, and tips on how to help women of color at work, highlighting the importance of allyship and showing up, some of which we hope to get to today. Mita is also a contributor for the Harvard Business Review, Adweek, and several publications. And really exciting news, she has her first book coming out called Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace, which we're going to get to a little bit in this interview as well. Thank you so much, Mita, for joining us.
Thank you so much for that incredible introduction. I love how you said her first book. Thank you, putting it out there.
So Mita, let's just get right to it. I mean, there's just so much ground here to cover. I mean, what inspires you to build this career in marketing and DEI?
It all starts with my background. I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. I was born and raised in the US outside of Boston with my younger brother. And I always say I was the funny looking, dark-skinned girl with the long, funny looking braid whose parents spoke funny English until it wasn't funny anymore. And I was bullied a lot, both verbally and physically growing up by my peers. They made me know every day I did not belong in that community. And I also did not grow up in an Instagram era. And so I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me in TV commercials, in films, in magazines. And because I was painfully shy and introverted, which I believe are two different things, I just wrote a lot. I read a lot. I was just really fascinated by whose story gets told and why, and who has the power of the pen. And so it's no surprise, given my upbringing and my passion for writing, I ended up going into storytelling and marketing.
And you made this jump, right, from like the consumer products industry right into the investment management. What kind of brought that transition about for you?
So I was at Unilever for several years. Prior to that, my entire career, including Unilever, had been all public companies. And so I thought to myself, what would it look like if I really challenged myself to go into not only tech, but fintech, into startup, into a world that I knew very little about. But for me and what we do at Carta, I think about inclusion as being a driver of the business. And so I think about our role in the ecosystem, and I think about how many Black founders we know don't get access to the same amount of capital as white founders. And there's been recently studies that show Black founders versus white founders will raise considerably less when it comes to pre-seed and friends and family rounds. We know the statistics of Black women entrepreneurs in this country growing at one of the fastest rates. Yet I think the stat is they get less than 0.001% of VC funding. So inclusion is about workforce, and it's more. It's really thinking about the role your company plays in the greater ecosystem. And so that's why I was drawn to come to Carta.
So let's talk a little bit about your kind of own path, though. I mean, your own story. You talk a lot about your voice and having, really finding your voice. What was that moment when you realized that there was something that you needed to share about yourself?
I think it was a slow simmer. I think if I take a step back, I'll invoke Taylor Swift for a second. My 8-year-old is obsessed with Taylor Swift, and there's a song called Antihero. And there's a lyric that says, "Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me." And I felt that way for a lot of my career. Like early on, I job hopped a lot. And I wondered why I wasn't getting promoted, why I was being overlooked, was I in the wrong places? And part of it was this final acknowledgement that I was entering a world of work that didn't serve people who looked like me. wasn't built for people who look like me. But then there was the cultural piece. And many of the gifts my immigrant parents gave me didn't serve me well in corporate America. My dad used to always say, stay humble, hustle hard, keep your head down and stay out of trouble, you'll be recognized. That's not how it works in corporate America, right? So I think about a lot of the things culturally that I've had to unlearn. I do think one of my most pivotal sort of moments was I had just graduated from graduate school and I was in a role and I just was dream company, started marketing, and I was like, I'm killing it. I felt really good about it. And I'll never forget my then manager, impromptu, out of nowhere, pulls me out of my cubicle into a really large conference room. And it's seared in my mind, this memory. He had a very ugly Hawaiian print shirt on. Yes, I'm being judgmental. I just remember this whole thing. We sit down and he says to me, we just came out of talent management review. No one knows what you do here. You don't speak up in meetings. You're a wallflower. You are not going to become a manager, never mind a director here. And that was really painful feedback to hear. There wasn't a lot of care. As my friend Jill Katz says, you get feedback with candor, courage, and care. But it was something I absolutely needed to hear after I got over the anger, to really think about, okay, I'm excited to be here, but I'm nervous to use my voice. I'm nervous to speak up in meetings. I'm nervous to contribute. And just like athletes, I really believe this. I'm not an athlete, but using your voice is practice. It doesn't happen overnight. I wasn't born a natural orator. I have to really continue to practice speaking and speaking up. But that was one of the pivotal moments in my career when I got that feedback.
Once you got that feedback, what did you start doing differently?
That's a great question. This is the advice I give people. You have to actually practice using the sound of your voice. So my husband will attest our many years of marriage. He will have heard me late at night in a empty kitchen room or living room, practicing my presentation, talking points in the car or in the shower. Anytime I got a pre-read for meetings, I always would read the pre-read and study it. And one of my big tips for people who are nervous about using their voice is when you enter that meeting and somebody presents and then there's sort of a lull, any questions, be the first one, ask a question, right? I always ask a question first or make a comment first. It gets me more comfortable speaking. I also had a buddy system. Let's say Diane and I were both working together. We both went into a quarterly sales results meeting. And I would say to her, Diane, I really want to ask this question. Don't let me leave without asking it. Right. But part of it was like seizing those opportunities that were career defining moments and being prepared, but then also volunteering to speak and present. And it's with practice that I've just gotten better over the years. Certainly didn't happen overnight.
You're now the co-host of the Brown Table. And I'm curious about, because our focus is really on AAPI women leaders. Are there specific challenges that you think are more geared towards AAPI women that maybe are overlooked or not addressed?
Another great question. So DC Marshall and I started the Brown Table Talk podcast. I always say it's a love letter to my younger self. All the things that I wish I could have talked openly about. Like, I didn't know that other women were experiencing these things at our workplaces. I just didn't talk about it. We wanted the perspective of a Black woman and a South Asian woman at the table, also to show people that we are not a monolith, women of color. And Dee and I have had very similar and also very different experiences. I speak very openly on our podcast about my South Asian upbringing and how, in many ways, that has held me back in my career and things I've had to unlearn, as I was just talking about. But I will also say the model minority myth is real. It's still alive in our workplaces. And I talk about that in my new book, Reimagine Inclusion, because the statistics still show that there is plenty of room and space for Asian leaders in our C-suites, in our boardrooms. And yet, when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, I talk about this openly in Reimagine Inclusion. I have been in spaces and places where I have been told not to include Asian colleagues in sponsorship programs, to only focus on Black and Hispanic. Of course, we must focus on Black and Hispanic, but Asian colleagues need just as much help and support. And because of the model minority myth, I've seen this play out so many times in workplaces where, well, no, they don't need help. We shouldn't focus on mentorship or sponsorship of those individuals.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your landscape on DEI right now in the VC industry. with what's going on with Fearless Fund. What are your thoughts on that?
Let's start with affirmative action being overturned in this country. Let's start with what's happening in the bigger marketplace, which is there is a huge backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that is here to stay. And why is that? Because the demographics of the US have so quickly changed. Right now, 40% of US citizens identify as an ethnicity other than white. I think in 10, 15 years' time, the statistics show that'll be closer to 50%. P&G shows us that there's over $5 trillion of spending power with the multicultural consumer alone. That doesn't include the LGBTQ plus community, veterans, individuals with disabilities, all these dimensions of diversity. And so when people say there's no growth to be had, I'm like, you're not looking at the right, you're not thinking about who you're selling to authentically and why, and who you're excluding. So I think that tension is forever going to be there. And I think what's happening with affirmative action being overturned in this country, right now the EEOC is saying that there is no impact to the workplace, but yet there is, because of the fear, the questioning, why are we focused on certain groups and not all? Like, all of these things are coming up now. And yet the statistics show we all don't start from the same place, right? I always say to people, if our efforts were working, then our C-suites would look different. Our leadership teams would look different. The boardrooms would look different, right? It just, they would, the diversity of representation would be there. So let's just look at the numbers and statistics, and yet they're not. And so to me, it's very confusing, because I'm like, well, let's look at the numbers and we see we still have a ways to go.
What would it take for, if you could tell the audience quickly, what does Carta do and what you do at DEI and how you really make that impact?
We help, as you all started in my introduction, we're all about equity and equity ownership. And one of the things we've been doing at Carta, and this is what I talk about in Reimagine Inclusion, is we have to build end-to-end inclusion ecosystems. We start with the workforce, and that's so important. Making sure you are representing the communities you are serving in your workforce, and that's at all levels. That's one part of the pillar. The second is products and services. How are you selling your products and services in the marketplace, and to who and why? We're really proud that we have a partnership with Sephora's accelerator program. Sephora, who's been an incredible diversity, equity, inclusion journey, and they are really committed to getting more Black and brown founders on shelf online and helping them bring their products into the marketplace. The third is really about supplier diversity. I get really excited if we can be someone's first customer. That means a lot. And so to those listening, I ask, are you writing the same checks to the same partners and suppliers, and why? I mean, I worked for many big Fortune 500 companies, and I was like, why do we write the same check to the same person every year? Just like we talk about diverse slates for candidates, we should have diverse slates for agencies and vendors and suppliers. And the last piece is really around values. You can say you're ready to stand for values, but are you ready to stand up for them in those moments that matter? And that's where you're also seeing more and more companies either staying silent and complicit, like Coinbase or Basecamp, very clearly saying, we're not going to be talking about politics at work. We're not talking about social justice at work. And then you have companies and brands like I've had the privilege of working on Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia. You have companies that are like, this is part of our DNA and who we are and who we stand for, and we're not going to stop talking about the values that are important to us. So you'll certainly see this, I think, continued bifurcation in the marketplace.
So a few more questions here. So for Carta, are you helping, for example, this partnership with Sephora to source diverse founders?
We are actually helping because of our networks. I'm constantly recommending people to the program that I know. And so that's exciting. But also we have people teaching Equity 101, right? So if I'm starting a lipstick company and I'm really focused on my lipstick and I'm excited, do I understand what it means if I bring in investors and how much of my company I'm giving away, or what that should look like, or the structure, some really sort of, we meet with founders who are just starting their products or services. There can be a real uphill battle sometimes on financial literacy. And we're so proud to help with that.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll clarify. So on the Sephora side, what does that partnership look like with Carta?
So we actually go in and we'll teach Equity 101. And we're part of there. So Sephora has an accelerator, and they take their founders through, I would say, a pretty intense few weeks, like you're in college, like the basics, everything from designing a package and what it should look like on shelf and online, social media strategy to the financials, right? And so we are one of many partners that they bring in.
And then regarding so that's the founder side, but on the fund side, I know Carta also, you have clients with fund managers, right?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
How are you working in the DI space for these fund managers?
We're helping support them as well in terms of the investments they're making. And we do, as if you follow us in social media, a lot of webinars that our marketing team and our sales team are putting on for education. And, one of the things that I think is so powerful is storytelling, fund managers sharing their experiences and people being able to learn from each other. And I think that community is so important, that we help bring people together so they don't feel alone in their journey.
What do you think it'll take for fund managers to make it to the power seat, make it to the top? What is one of the biggest hurdles you're seeing for these diverse fund managers?
I mean, I think it's access to capital, access to opportunities, access to networks. It's very similar. I mean, whether it's fund manager or assistant brand manager, or you're entering a finance career, they're all different careers, but the obstacles remain the same. I always say, whose career are you fighting for when the doors are closed other than your own? Right? If we all had that mentality to think about who else are we helping lift and bring up along the journey, the world would be a much different place. And I very boldly and unapologetically say I've been over-mentored and under-sponsored in my career, right? Sponsorship looks very different than mentorship. Sponsorship is about giving you a seat at the table, access to capital, access to conversations and individuals that you normally wouldn't have an introduction to, actually teaching someone about an expertise or a craft. It's different than I get coffee with you and I say, tell me about your career, right? You're really going to take the time to invest in me and upskill me and actually open doors that would have been closed to me. And that's what we need more of, regardless of what industry we're talking about. That's what we need more of.
Incredible. And then do you also talk to LPs at Carta as well? And
yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Push that envelope for, we need more diversity, inclusion at the table on the LP side.
I mean, I think it's the similar principles, right? It doesn't change, I don't believe. It's, access to decision makers, access to power, the ability to also understand that someone like myself has power and privilege at this point in her career. How am I giving that away? How am I using that to show up for others? I think it's all very similar.
I'm curious about your own sponsorship. I mean, how did you go about finding your own sponsors in your career?
That's a great question. One of the myths in my book is we need more people of color in leadership. Let's launch a mentorship program. So I really caution companies. I feel like anytime there's a problem, retention, recognition, let's do a mentorship program. And sponsorship is very different. So sponsorship might look like the following. I'm going to give a very concrete example. Let's say I'm a senior brand manager running a, part of a beauty portfolio. And my boss says to me, I'd like for you to look at the investments that we made in media in the last year and do an analysis for the division to see what the investments look like. Did they pay it off? Okay, so that's a great example of a project my boss gives me, and I'm just going to sit and work on it. It's going to be great. But what if I actually stop to look up and think, who else in the organization might be interested in this project? Probably the CFO, probably someone from finance. And depending on the size of the company, you might not have access to the CFO, but you might have access to the VP of finance or director of finance. So what if I set up a meeting, Shweta, with you? You're the, let's say, CFO. And I said, I just wanted to get together, wanted to let you know I'm working on this analysis, and presented it to you. You might start asking questions, you might get curious. And then let's say you come back to me in 4 weeks. I have some more questions I want you to address. I go back in 4 weeks, and then you say, hey, I'm having a team meeting. Do you want to come present at my team meeting? Do you see how I'm slowly building a relationship off of the work versus me just setting up, let's have coffee? And then what's eventually going to happen is we build a relationship off the work, is that if you are the person, now here's what I say about sponsorship, you have to be at least 2 levels above me in my organization. You have to have a pretty big budget. You have to have access to talent and also be in the room when talent decisions are being made. Because ultimately what I want to have happen is, other than my boss, because we don't always get along with our bosses, right? Let's be honest. I want someone else in that room who's going to advocate for me, who's going to sponsor my career. And that's how it looks differently. And I can talk to anyone and sit down with them in an organization and help you try to figure out who could be sponsoring your career. The last thing I'll say is this isn't like a friendship bracelet. You don't go up to someone and say, can you be my sponsor? That's not how it works. You strategically think about who else would be interested in your work other than your boss and get them interested in it and get them to feel like they're co-creating it with you. Because then I promise you, when the doors are closed and they're talking about Mita, Shweta's going to be like, oh yeah, she did this fantastic analysis. She should definitely be up for that promotion. Here's all the things I've seen come from her.
I do feel like the sponsorship is a two-way street. I mean, there was a paper that we put out with Phoenix that really talked about, the importance of sponsorship. For women of color, it is very much, yes, we need the sponsorship. We also need like LPs. We need the C-suite to actually step up and open those doors for us.
And there's a famous story. One of the CEOs of Deloitte, former CEO of Deloitte, went around to C-suite and asked individuals who they were sponsoring. And then he did the exercise again and said, you all have to pick 2 individuals to sponsor who are not in your direct division and also who don't look like you, and really challenge yourself. So the thing that leaders don't understand, and I talk about this in the book, Sylvia and Hewlett wrote an amazing book called The Sponsor Effect. All about the fact that you shine, I shine. The number one job of leaders is to create more leaders. And so if you were a leader, imagine you're sponsoring 5 women of color. Imagine your legacy of how you want to lead that company and who you're helping build. And so that's when you think about exactly, because who doesn't want to sponsor? Everybody wants a sponsor, right? But really to challenge the leaders in the C-suite to ask them, who are they sponsoring and why?
Have you had a fund manager or a founder been very successful at fundraising? And when you look back, has it been sponsorship, or what has it been that you think has been a key highlight to their success?
I think it's been, I would say sponsorship. I have been, for a few years now, really privileged and excited to be writing a column for Entrepreneur. And I mostly focus on founders of color, women of color. And I go back through all those stories. And one of the common themes is, there's a few common themes. They all worked for big companies. They had a brilliant idea. The big company didn't want to hear it. They launched their own idea. And it's somebody who wrote that first check who believed in them. And that's somebody who sponsored them and got them access to more checks, got them access to people who could help them in different areas of expertise, have them join their boards, right? And so it is throughout those stories, I think, wow, it was that one person, 1 or 2 people who really believed in the idea as much as they believed in it.
Tell us a little bit about, who believed in you to get you to where you are and the trailblazer you are right now.
I have many people who believed in me. I've been really privileged and blessed. Jonathan Atwood is a career sponsor of mine, and he and I are actually interviewed in Sylvia's book, The Sponsor Effect. And he was one of the first people, I'll never forget, I was presenting to the executive team. Let's say it was on a Tuesday, and he wanted me to show up in his office on a Monday night. And I'm like, oh, I already sent the pre-read. Why do I have to go? I know what I'm going to say. He was one of the first people who said to me, okay, you submitted the pre-read. Now we're going to go around the table. I'm going to tell you what they all think of your proposal. I'm going to tell you the backstory of there's actually not funding for this. The head of supply chain is fighting with the head of finance, or is fascinating, right? Because we all think about these individuals as gods, or I did growing up, like, oh, these people are like gods, and they're human, right? And so if you can understand the human psychology, he was one of the first people who actually sat me down and said, let's go around the exec team who you're presenting to, and then let me tell you what some of the questions are that might come up.
You're going to be talking about presence, hopefully, in the upcoming South by Southwest. We'll vote for you. Presence is a huge topic that comes up with our audience. What's the myth around presence?
The myth around presence, where do I start? For much of my career, I've been told to work on executive presence, but when I ask for follow-up details, it's like, you need more gravitas. What's gravitas? Get some more charisma. What's charisma? Your ability to command the room. I mean, I've heard it all. And the reality is I know people find this shocking. I'm 5'1.5", most of my career, I've worked for men who are at least over 6 feet, white men. And so it's interesting when you think about presence and how we have been raised in many of our corporate spaces, who have been our role models, right? Who have been our role models? And we build the idea and the notion off of executive presence, off of, let's say, one leader we have consistently seen. And for me, what is executive presence? I said, leadership is your ability to create more leaders. And when I think about if I'm presenting, if I'm speaking, what does it mean to me to show up? Show up as my authentic self, show up with a good story. Can I influence? Can I interact with the room on camera? Can I make connections? Right? This is why my friend Lan Fan and I were like, this is absolute bleep bleep. Like, let's unpack what it means, right? Like you're just
what about hair though? I mean, that's a question around like hair and makeup, you know.
Oh yeah, of course.
I have curly hair, but I will tell you, I think part of the reason I've straightened it so much is, you know, it was like, that's what I saw.
Well, Dee and I talk about this on the Brown Table Talk podcast, especially with the discrimination Black women face when it comes to, and Black men, Black individuals in our workplaces, and legislation that's being passed in the US, the Crown Act, to make it illegal to discriminate on the basis of hair. But you're absolutely right. One of the first executive coaches I was ever assigned when they thought I could be a director in X company, she told me to always wear makeup. She told me to always wear heels, keep my hair straight, and always wear a jacket with shoulder pads. Because I was so was short. And for years I did this thinking, oh my God. And now, you know, I presented recently in flats and it was pretty freeing. As I was like, you know what? I'm a dynamo. I'm still gonna people are still gonna hear me. I don't need to wear these 5-inch heels and feel like I'm gonna fall off. But you're right. There's so much bias in the way women present versus men. Like I don't have the privilege to present in a hoodie and jeans. I don't have the privilege to not show up with makeup on, or my hair a certain way, or even then, you know, because I work in tech, I love Carta, but I don't need another hoodie. I'll still wear nice jeans and a jacket, right? Because I know that I am judged differently. I know that I can't present in a hoodie or show up in a hoodie.
Yeah, this is great. Well, in your new book, Reimagine Inclusion Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace, it's going to be released soon. Tell us more about this book.
Yes, the book is out October 3rd, but you can pre-order right now. And I am saying all the quiet parts out loud of what holds us back from meaningful progress in the workplace. So I picked 13 myths because I actually have kept a lot of career journals over the years. So maybe a tip for our listeners, I know many people like to journal. Career journals for me have been writing down a lot of my career experiences, unpacking the highs and lows. And so it was easier then to go back and write the book. But some of my myths include, I'm all for diverse talent as long as they're good. Sort of touched on that today. Why are you asking for a raise? Your husband makes more than enough money. I know you'll be both interested in that. And we can work from home now. The future of work is, of course, inclusive. And so I'm excited for you all to read it.
Mita, I'm going to say that number 6 myth. I love it. It's one that I always get. What, you know, your husband makes money. Why do you need a raise?
Oh my God. And it's also like, it's the double-edged sword. So I can't show up with the hoodie and jeans. But then if I show up with really nice things, also a reason to pay me less. I'll share a quick story with you all. It's in the book, but I'll remember I was going to a leadership offsite years ago. My pay was under review. The only thing I really like is nice jewelry. I don't really spend money on anything else, but I took off like all my jewelry and my husband's like, you're not wearing your wedding ring? And I was like, I don't want them to give me any reason to pay me less. And the more women I talk to are like, yeah, I don't wear my logo bags. Like I'm very careful about what I wear at work because I will be judged. And then subconsciously they'll pay me less. It's wild.
Excellent. Well, I'm certainly going to get my copy. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.